The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the launch of this policy briefing on the Sustainable Products Initiative. My name is Martin Porter. I'm Executive Chair of CISL Brussels, which is providing the secretariat to the new task force which has produced this policy briefing, and to CLG Europe, about which you will hear from my colleague Tamid in a moment. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today, and indeed a good number of you, which I think is testament to the interest in the topic that we are going to be talking about, which is at the forefront of everyone's thinking in the European Green Deal, everybody working on climate and the circular economy in Brussels, the EU, and more widely. We have a tremendous agenda here today, and you can see in front of you, I hope, what we will be doing. And we have a number of excellent panelists and speakers, beginning with the European Commission, Matjaž Magla, who is going to set out what the Commission is doing, having heard from my own colleague, Tamid Chowdhury, about the policy briefing which we are launching today, and the work that we're doing with the task force on this issue. After that, we will turn to a discussion from members of the business community who are part of the task force, and we will hear their perspectives on the agenda that we are looking at today, and then go to a Q&A, including with Matjaž. And after we have had a few minutes of question, answer, and discussion, we'll then hear reflections on this from the Director of Climate Action Network Europe, Chiara Martinelli. So welcome to all of our panelists. It's great to have you here, as well as a great number of participants in this meeting. And before we kick off, and I hand over to my colleague Tamid, let me just provide a couple of words on the rules for the discussion today. I hope you will be able to access through the panel that you have on your screen some of the materials that we have in the handout section. The policy briefing is also available online on the CISL website, so you will be able to access it there as well. And in that, you'll also see the backgrounds and biographies of the different speakers that we have here. If you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat function. We will be monitoring those, and I will be able to relay those which I'm able to our different speakers and panelists. So please do put those in the chat as and when you would like to put them. And lastly, please be aware this is a public discussion. It will be recorded, and that will also be available to you afterwards online. So with that, and a busy afternoon for an hour and a half or so ahead of us, let me pass over and welcome my colleague who's been behind a lot of the work involved in this, Tamid, who's a program manager here in Brussels with CISL. Tamid, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Martin. And it's a pleasure to be here and talk a bit about our policy briefing. Before I do that, if we can just go to the next slide, I wanted to spend a minute or two just talking about who we are. So firstly, in terms of the Corporate Leaders Group Europe, we are a progressive business platform that is seized with the opportunity of the next 5-year term within the European Parliament to really influence Europe's response to climate and related challenges. And we really push a highest common denominator position among our membership. So in all, we are a voice for business that is influential, cross-sectoral and pan-European. We bring together world-class thought leadership, high-level policy-related convening, and impactful communications and engagement. So that's Corporate Leaders Group Europe. And if we go to the next slide, I'm really excited to talk a bit about our new task force, our task force for climate neutral and circular materials and products, which is linked to the Corporate Leaders Group Europe. We are a group of businesses that was created in September 2021. And we're particularly interested in driving the conversation around across our sectors and value chains to bring forward a move away from more linear energy and resource intensive production of materials to circular materials that are produced without fossil fuels or greenhouse gas emissions as byproducts. So our key objective is to drive the development, implementation and support of more ambitious future-proof policies, programs and initiatives in Europe. So you know, I really hope that we can continue working on this space. And so this is not a sort of one-off, but something that we hope to do more of in the future. So if we go to the next slide. Just as that's coming up, the reason we're here today is to talk about our policy briefing that has been launched today. And just to invite you to have a look at that. If you're attending through GoToWebinar, you should have a link through the flyer, but you can also scan the QR code in front of you here. So this is our new publication looking at the Sustainable Products Initiative, which we'll hear more about in a moment. And our paper is entitled Accelerating the Transition to a Climate Neutral and Circular Economy, How the EU Can Deliver It Through the Sustainable Products Initiative. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to take a moment before we delve into the discussion and hear from our great panelists a bit about some of our recommendations and what we're setting out in the paper. And if you have a moment, you can read the executive summary and indeed the rest of the report, which details this in a little bit more. We have 5 recommended principles, and I'll just quickly go through them. So the first one is being ambitious in its aims, as in the Sustainable Products Initiative, in delivering the Green Deal. So I think looking at the global context in terms of Paris, the Paris agreements and the recently concluded COP26, it is a really key opportunity for us to drive the delivery towards the Green Deal and the European Green Deal. And I think what we are calling for is something that's ambitious, and noting that considering it's based upon the eco-design principles, implementing acts could take quite a few years to come. And so our call is for this to happen and not to get sort of stuck in the block holes, but to be something that really does affect change, because this could be a real opportunity in terms of a legislative file that can bring together or drive the circular economy action plan that the EU wants to implement. The second principle is building a progressive policy framework based upon competitive sustainability. And this is, you may not have come across the term competitive sustainability before, but we talk about it a bit more in the report. And indeed, we have previously published more in-depth reviews in terms of what that term could mean. I think that the point in this is to say we see the Sustainable Products Initiative as part of a wider movement in terms of looking at a more holistic way of how our economy operates. So, competitive sustainability can be defined as the ability of an economy, companies, and industrial ecosystems to excel relative to international competitors in their transition to a sustainable economy, with climate neutrality at its core, through investment in the necessary innovation. So, essentially, what we are saying is to bring the two concepts in terms of environmental protection, but also in terms of competitiveness together in one wider concept in terms of how we want to drive our future economy. So the third one is improving transparency of product sustainability. So this is basically the idea that with raw materials, it is hard to know whether they are more climate friendly or indeed carbon neutral or not. And currently there is a bit of a disincentive if you are creating more climate neutral or more carbon friendly materials, if they currently cost a bit more because the technologies aren't quite there. If we are basing it purely on price, then there is less of an incentive to buy them. So what we're calling for is greater transparency, and indeed what we understand is that there will be a products passport or a digital passport in the Sustainable Products Initiative. And our view with that, we welcome it. We'd be really interested to hear more about it, but our general thoughts were there are quite a lot of different types of information that has been collected. So in the constructions, we have the environmental products declarations. There's a batteries regulation, which has some sort of digital product passport as well. And we also have the product environmental footprint. So there's quite a few different frameworks. And I suppose our view was that we would invite the Commission to kind of look at these different things, not necessarily take them as face value, but to use that as reference point rather than working in silos. Fourth one is supporting innovation and being future-proof. So I think this is fairly self-explanatory, but essentially the idea that I think this piece of legislation and indeed across this space is about finding the balance between pushing for change, but also not being too restrictive in terms of some of that future innovation. And we see this piece of legislation as perhaps being a framework piece that can set some continuity in terms of direction, which can really help innovation, as opposed to something perhaps like the Innovation Fund, which is looking at particular bits of innovation. This can be a chance to set some of the longer term thinking and give that continuity that businesses would like. Finally, providing policy coherence across the wider EU industrial and climate initiatives. If you're listening to this, you probably have an idea that there's a lot of legislation coming out with the Fit for 55. We have the EU industrial strategy, which got renewed earlier this year. And I think we are conscious that also, with the Circular Economy Action Plan, there's a good number of pieces of legislation coming up in 2022 amongst when this this legislation is coming out. So it's really key that we have a holistic view when this legislation is going through, so that we don't miss things because one piece is over there and another is over there. So those are the 5 recommended principles. I did want to go to, if we could go to the next slide. So we also wanted to take an opportunity to give some more specific pieces of information in terms of what a Sustainable Products Initiative could do. And I'll try and go through this relatively quickly, but I think it is also key in terms of giving actual genuine policy recommendations, as well as the sort of wider principles. So the first one is implementing measures that support EU manufacturers and producers in their journey towards decarbonisation and circularity. So particularly putting declining limits on embedded life cycle emissions for the most CO2 intensive materials rich final products. The second one is strengthen embedded CO2 reporting requirements and material passporting requirements, adopting standardized CO2 rating labels for the most CO2 intensive inputs into key value chains, whilst making this process practical for companies. We also suggested putting minimum recycled content, reused or reduced the use of virgin raw material requirements for key materials intensive in sectors, so such as buildings, vehicles and packaging. Setting cross-cutting requirements to ensure that low carbon and circular public procurement requirements are placed in all future revisions of EU sector legislation, Again, buildings, vehicles, public works, and infrastructure could be examples of that. Reforming the rules regarding the EU standard setting process for construction products, so cement and concrete, working alongside the upcoming construction product and regulation and the Euro codes, which I believe are due to be updated. And finally, establish an ambitious scope for the SPI, working with company legislation to include as many sectors as possible based upon an assessment of the most carbon and resource intensive products. So this could include new buildings and construction products, automotive and packaging. So that was a bit more of a detailed run through, but I would really invite you to read the report. We'd also love to hear from you if you are particularly interested in this file. And without further ado, I think that's my bit done. So I'll pass back to you, Martin.
Thank you, Tamid. That was excellent, and I think sets the scene extremely well for our next speaker, somebody who is at the very heart, obviously, of the work being done in the European Commission on this, and who I am sure many of you are familiar with, given all of that activity he's involved in and is often speaking publicly. So Matjaž, Malgaj, welcome. Great to see you again. Thank you for joining this discussion. And I think over to you. Look forward to hearing what you've got to say and to teeing up, obviously, the discussion we'll have afterwards. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure to be in an event chaired by you again, and also many thanks to Tamid for a very interesting presentation. I have to say that the principles that the task force produced resonate quite a lot. I can disclose with what we're thinking about, what we've been investigating, but also they resonate with the feedback we got from a pretty widely consulted general and sort of specific public. So I'd like to congratulate first the task force and all the work that you're doing here in Brussels, and it's actually a pleasure really to hear the voice of progressive business and the demand that's out there for the work we're doing. But I'd like to do in the next roughly 10 minutes, and I count on Martin to rush me along if I'm starting to take too long, is just to give you a general contextual presentation of where the Sustainable Products Initiative came from, where we think we're going. Unfortunately, I do have to be a little bit more general than I would like to be, because the process is still going on. We're discussing with colleagues, and it would be a bit unfair if I said this is going to be in and that's going to be out. But I think I can be specific enough for this to be useful for everybody. So if you can please move to the first slide. Just to sort of remind everybody, I think this was said in an introduction already, I think two elements I'd like to bring out here. First, the Sustainable Products Initiative, and embedded in the Circular Economy Action Plan, is part of an ambitious European Green Deal. There's no doubt about that. The commitment of the President, but also of the Council and the Parliament, I think has been confirmed a number of times in the past 2 years. But the second sort of dimension that I'd like to bring up is that this particular one really depends a lot on the innovation of the industry, on the buy-in of the industry, on the race to the top, if you want. That was sort of also brought out, I thought, through the report of the task force. So really, I think these two components, and I'm going to come back to the objectives, but really keeping in mind ambitious Green Deal and a big role of industry and consumers, in fact, to sort of drive this with help of the regulatory framework. So if you can please move to the next slide. Basically, what we are asked to develop, and we've been working very hard in the past year and a half or so, was to make a legislative initiative, so not a strategy, but a regulatory initiative that will help make products fit for basically the future we need, if I borrow from the UN terminology, but also to help further in reducing waste, which is, you're all forward-looking and looking to the circular economy being developed very fast, but unfortunately we're still stuck in a linear economy predominantly, which generates a lot of waste. So it should help the waste policies and efforts to further reduce it. But also, but again, I think was said in the introduction, we know that there are front runners out there, so we know things are possible, and we want to help this process accelerate. I think this is the word, to get the front runners to be the norm. And I'm sure in Q&A there could be theological discussions about this, and I'm happy to answer that, but I'll stay at this level for the moment. Another thing that's very important to bear in mind is that there was a very explicit mandate to revise the Eco Design Directive. So the architecture we are investigating is largely based on how eco design worked, but I'm going to explain in a moment how this could be expanded depending on the final decision. So if you please move on to the next one. And then just a reminder why we have Green Deal at all. It's not a quirk, it's an absolute necessity on the way where a lot of mega trends are heading. Basically inefficient use of resources, planetary boundaries are being exceeded. It's again it's not a thing of science fiction, and I can disclose that much for those more initiated among you, that we did base a lot of our analysis also on the work of the JRC, looking how European consumption and production is actually breaching those boundaries, and I think very clear evidence to this effect will be presented. And then finally, the SPI should also be seen as one of the tools helping to move on in progression towards the circular economy, which again, I don't need to repeat, but it's not just keeping the value in the chain and minimizing or reducing waste to zero, but also a bit regenerative in nature. I think this is the definition we would like to follow. So aspects that relate also to biodiversity should be at least looked at when we are looking at the measures. If you can please move on to the next one. Then on I'd say the same problem, but a bit of a different side on it already indicates a little bit how we're going to go about it is, as we like to repeat, it comes from few studies, but the big share of impacts, it's actually designed in the product. So helping to design products differently is certainly one of the most important things we'd like to do. Information was mentioned before, which is not just to consumers, as important that is this, but what we discovered, what we knew but confirmed in our process of assessing the impacts is that there is clearly huge demand for having much clearer information, what's in, how things are put together, how you can disassemble them, also in the business-to-business relations. So this is one important aspect that we are looking at, how to make it easier actually for the circular economy to work in its different manifestations, but also something that is closer to consumers. Again, we have evidence now, not just an assumption, that products do break down easier than they did in the past. We can discuss a lot, but depends also a lot on the sector. But they break down easier in the past in many cases, and it's a bit more difficult to repair them. Some of it is natural progression because things are sophisticated, but this is again breaking, it's putting a brake on a better, easier recycling and remanufacturing, keeping things in value chain. Finally, not to go in much detail, it is very clear that current eco design, in terms of its impacts, it's seen as a great success. Basically, energy saved through eco design measures equals, if I'm not mistaken, entire wind energy generated in the European Union, just to put it in perspective. So all the efforts to promote renewables have roughly similar gains as one regulatory tool that looks a bit gray and detailed and slow, but with immense potential impacts. If we can now move on to the next slide. I already disclosed a few things from the slide, but just really to say again things that I think resonate also with the report of the task force. Materials are more difficult to use, there is lack of information. A lot of people agree, majority, also a lot of companies, perhaps a bit less than just people or consumers, that that products do not sufficiently cover the costs, and that their impacts by either in being produced or during use or during disposal can create. And that's a bit really the trickiest part of how to regulate for such problem, because an obvious solution just to make things more expensive applied across the board is probably not going to work. So you have to look into a bit more sophisticated ways of addressing this, making it clear how the impacts arise, making it more incentivizing buying better stuff, but also, of course, looking at taxation, not necessarily at union level at this stage, but at the national level. If we can move on to the next one. I'm carefully looking at Martin. If he starts giving me an ugly eye, I'll know I'm moving too slowly. But so a little bit on what you're probably, most of you, most interested in is what will come out. Well, first, I can confirm that we are clearly working on an assumption that we would extend the scope of eco-design legislation, which is currently focusing on energy use stage. There is some space for addressing other areas. As you know, we do have measures that deal also with water consumption and some other impacts, but the idea here is to have a flexible, future-proof tool that can deal with any product that would be significant enough, or group of products, or horizontal measure across groups of products that would be significant enough in terms of its impacts to be addressed. Clearly, we would focus on priority areas at the beginning. This is not going to be a Soviet monster prescribing, you know, every little chewing gum how it should look like. Actually, it won't deal with food anyway. But it's really looking for impact. So I think you can reasonably expect that we would start working after on things we already announced in the Circular Economy Action Plan, but we are further deepening our understanding on how actually to change understanding of sectoral impacts into understanding of product impacts, and then how to deal with them. For those familiar with the Eco-Design Directive, minimum sustainability requirements are basically sort of entry-level requirements. So what do you actually have to have in terms of performance or in terms of content that you can sell the product? We would also look, as I hinted a few times already now, how to increase information requirements, including through a European digital product passport. The feedback we got from our consultation here and targeted consultations was this could be a great innovation, but be careful not to roll out a very complicated scheme at the outset, but really progress through where you can and then scale it up. So we're now discussing with a number of people inside the Commission, different departments, how to translate this, what to think about it, what we can do, and I think it's a very promising area, but will require quite a lot of work to get it right. But its potential for both the businesses, for consumers, even for regulatory authorities could be immense if we get it right. Mentioned incentives, we're looking at how much more closely than perhaps we can now link things such as producer responsibility schemes, procurement schemes in member states to performance of the products or to their environmental impacts. So that's another area we're working on. We are looking at how these different measures could also help what you can call circular business models and value retention. You could also use other expressions, but the key point here is to look at how through regulatory tools you can complement what is already going on in removing barriers for new business models that are based more on keeping products as a service, if you want. So there again, the feedback from the consultation we had was you cannot prescribe how these business models could look like, but you should look into removing barriers. So I think, again, I'm not disclosing anything inappropriate, but to say that we're heeding this advice that clearly came out. And then finally, again, sounds a bit boring, but absolutely indispensable. We need to take into account the lessons we have from current implementation of eco-design in design of the new instrument, and then make sure that hopefully we can apply it even a bit faster and with more might, but keeping a very transparent, inclusive process that is a hallmark today. If you can please move towards, we're getting towards the end, Martin, I promise. Just to remind everybody that this is a joint initiative, which I, as a these days I'm an aging civil servant. I used to be promising young civil servant. I think the category is moving, but I'm very privileged to work as coordinator because I work with 3 director generals in a very tight manner, and it's a pleasure to get the expertise and the commitment, equal commitment, which is very strong from all 3. And we work with a number of other departments very closely, but I'm not going to go in an internal listing of them, but it's a very inclusive process internally, and I'm sure also it's going to be done externally with other stakeholders, whom we consulted quite widely. I know some of the consultation deadlines were short, but it was immense complexity to manage, and we're quite happy to have managed to have both targeted input and general consultations. We trying to develop a robust impact assessment, so it's taken us a little bit longer than we were asked at the beginning, but at the moment it's I think formal by now that the proposal is expected to be adopted still in the first quarter of next year. And I think this brings me, next slide please. This brings me to the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matjaž. That's an excellent overview, obviously, of all the work that you're doing. It tees us up extremely well to hear from members of the task force that you mentioned and kindly said was helpful in giving you perspectives from progressive businesses who are working on this agenda with a view to making it as successful as possible. Obviously in terms of its environmental impact and also from a commercial, industrial perspective as well, of course. So with that, maybe I could ask Harry Ferhar, Ronald Misterud, Céline Carré and Anthony Abbots to join me on screen. And we welcome all of you as members of the new task force, and obviously as representatives of the companies who are active outside of the task force remit in your own areas of expertise, which obviously go to the heart of this subject, to give us your reflections on what you've just heard and any examples or thinking on what should be in this initiative when we see it come out in hopefully Q1 2022. We have enough time for you to give us 5 minutes or so each, and then we'll have a bit of time for questions and answers. And I'd just like to remind everybody, do put your questions in the chat or the question box if you're on LinkedIn. And of course, we'll invite Matjaž back as well to join in that, as well as Chiara when we get to that stage. So with that, Harry, welcome, and look forward to hearing what you have to say on this.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So yeah, I'm with Signify, the new name for Philips Lighting, so the global leader in lighting. And I would like to thank you, Matjaž, for let's say, for your reflections, and certainly also for the strong link with the Eco Design Directive. And we were deeply involved in the days of Commissioner Andres Piebalgs when he actually then created, and probably even in those days, with you in the team, the Eco Design Directive. So we strongly support also this upgrade, this renewal, so to expand its impact. And actually, when you look at the Sustainable Product Initiative, yeah, it's in a way, as we look at it, complementary as one of the 3 elements, one of the 3 areas where carbon needs to be reduced. And I'll say a few words on each of those, and then really link that also to some recommendations for the Strategic Product Initiative. So as a company, and actually in the Piebalgs days, we contributed to the Eco Design Directive from an energy efficiency perspective. So from a product use perspective, because we knew and we saw and we know that all today, that energy efficiency has to contribute to roughly half of the carbon emission reduction that is needed to keep us within relatively livable boundaries of global warming. So that is also why the directive then also started stimulating, and also through the creation of minimum energy performance standards, a reduction in scope 3. So what is scope 3 for us? The energy consumption, the electricity consumption, and carbon emissions during product use. And in those days, we also called for the global phase out of incandescent light bulbs. I think you all aware of that because it happened in the meantime. But essentially, we called for the total phase out of all our portfolio, which in those days you could say were like lamps and bulbs and tubes, which are now largely replaced by LED lighting. And this also led to a reduction from, let's say, roughly 2006, when lighting was 19% of global electricity, to 18% last year. And we will foresee that this will be reduced to 8% in 2030. And hopefully in parallel, those 8% will be for a large part powered by renewables. And then secondly, and I'll come back to this part because it's relevant still in relation to the SPI initiative. Then secondly, we looked at our own footprint. And in 2015 at COP21 in Paris, halfway the conference, we made a commitment to reduce our own footprint to zero. And we became carbon neutral September last year. And this was actually a program that ran and is still in a way still running for 10 years. So we reduced our energy consumption by 70%. We switched 100% worldwide to renewable electricity and a couple of other things. And if you then look at the Sustainable Products Initiative, you can of course look at it, you could say, from the demand side. So energy intensive materials, steel and cement and concrete and others. But we are much more at what you could say the demand side. We have a very wide portfolio of multi-component products. And of course, also there, we need to increase our knowledge and mapping of the embedded carbon, because then looking at the nature of the products, there are quite some components, but also products are sourced. So then actually have we source embedded carbon, which we would also like to bring down to zero by progressively also encouraging the market uptake of products that perform better and that have lower embedded carbon. But we do a few more things. So we're also moving to modular products so that they are upgradable, repairable, that components are reusable. And that is also relevant because it allowed us to launch a couple of years ago a service-based business model. So then actually you move from invoicing hardware to leasing lighting as a service. And then within that service, you create an incentive to continuously assess the economic and environmental operation of your products and systems, and then upgrade those. Because if you then take the whole life cycle, the whole lifetime into account, then it's always more economical to upgrade them to the latest state of technology. But then we're also moving to different ways of making products. We're moving to 3D printing, which means that for parts, by making products with 3D printed polycarbonates, you reduce the carbon footprint by half. We actually also just did a project in Copenhagen Airport where it was almost 3/4 that embedded carbon was reduced when moving to 3D printing. And also there you see that customers can more or less overnight then use an online configurator and design products as they would like those. And those would be then programmed and made by the 3D printers. Instead of that, you would have a long supply chain, let's say from Asia. And so also they're cutting carbon emissions. So then what I would like to say there is then for part it's important that the SPI stimulates development of low carbon, let's say low embedded carbon products, but also it should stimulate the uptake, the market uptake of those products. And that is why I mentioned a few things on scope 3. So today we are 84% in our sales LED, and mostly connected LED lighting, digital, backbone of IoT. So also actually enabling those business models. But then still 2/3 of all installed lighting in Europe and across the world is old technology. And that is where we see that also if we would develop circular procurement that not only looks at the economics over lifetime, but also at the carbon over lifetime, and then promotes the lowest carbon choice, and then accelerates renovation rates in line with the renovation wave in the European Green Deal. That is a way to also stimulate market uptake, because if we just wait and follow evolutionary market uptake of those better products, but today we're also talking about how actually had to stimulate the development of those. But then if we would just wait for evolutionary rates, then we would never be able to reach the carbon neutral goal by latest by 2050 for the European Green Deal. So maybe let me stop there for now. There are a few more things we could say about policies, but also to give one number. linked to the 2/3 of still old technology installed base. If that would be replaced by latest state-of-the-art energy efficient LED lighting, that would save 553 megatons of CO2, but also 177 billion euros per year, and about between a quarter and a third of that is in Europe alone. And we also see that the message is still that Europe imports 23 billion in fossil fuels per month. So those are the areas that actually could benefit greatly also from this initiative. So I'll leave it there for now, Martin.
Great, thank you, Harry. And I think we'll come back to the question of how European leadership on this helps from a business as well as obviously an environmental perspective to address these issues. But we'll come back to that after we've heard next from Rona. So welcome from Norway, I presume, and great to have you with us.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Martin, and thank you also, Matjaž, for a very, very interesting introduction. I'm representing Norsk Hydro, the largest aluminium company in Europe. We are present and have operations in more than 20 countries. We have a strong interest in the SPI, if I'm to call it that. I can almost say that our strategy is based on expectations for what this can develop further. It has really given an extra dimension, the energy, the European Green Deal, with the demand side focus. Since industry, we have been regulated for years, and now we have also this demand side focus, which is extremely interesting. We need demand for the low carbon products that we produce in Europe. I'll start by saying a bit about what we do in our company to develop these low carbon products, but also what we do together with designers to ensure the eco-design and to ensure the sustainable demand, and then comment a bit on the incentives afterwards. We are recycling more and more of the post-consumer scrap, the complex scrap, the used aluminium, to get this back. Our CEO announced this week at our Capital Markets Day that we already next year will produce aluminium based on recycled complex post-consumer scrap only. So 100% post-consumer scrap, which will take the carbon footprint then close to zero, because it takes only 5% of the energy to recycle. And this is possible because we have spent quite some time and resources to develop the sorting technology and the recycling technology. So this is one pathway. And then another pathway that we have been following for a long time and that we need to follow further is to ensure that we are based on renewable energy, which we are to a very, very large extent already, but we are increasing that. And also with the hydrogen, to make sure that we have the total energy source before 2050 based on renewable energy in all parts of the value chain. And we are present in the whole value chain. So this goes back to the bauxite mine and all the way to the product process. And then also I am very happy to mention what we also announced this week is the decarbonization of the aluminium process itself. Aluminium is a hard to abate sector, and this week it was announced this pathway where we invest in chloride electrolysis, carbon-free and industrial pilot before 2030. So this is and in addition to this, because this is new technology that needs to be there needs to be a new built aluminium electrolysis cell. But in addition to that, we are also having a pathway for carbon capture process for retrofitting existing smelters. So these are big plans and it takes time to replace them. So to have also a technology where we have been looking at more than 50 different technologies for direct air captures, and it's also capturing of the off gases. So to have that technology in place also for implementing on these existing plants is one of the pathways to take us to net zero before 2050. In addition to this, because this is how we can produce the low carbon material, in addition to this, we are working a lot with designers and product developers to ensure that we have products that can be reused and recycled, and to keep the material in the loop. We have also a digital passport pilot together with a third-party certifier and a furniture producer. So the digital passport idea from the Commission is very interesting. It's something that we are already testing. We have a QR code that is placed on this furniture with information about our carbon footprint and also with other information. So from our side, to incentivize this, because it's both about having the demand for these products and it's also and it's big investments. So of course, I have to mention the carbon leakage measures that needs to be in place. It needs to be a CBAM that is workable and then an ETS that is workable. But on the demand for these products, to have a life cycle assessment to where durability, reusability, recyclability, etc., gives a value to a product is essential. Standards and labels, they need to have clear definitions. And transparency, as mentioned, digital passport information is really needed for the consumer to make the right choices. And incentives for recycling of post-consumer scrap, because there is a difference there. Because with pre-consumer scrap, we of course do, that's part of the process, but to get as much scrap back as possible, because the recycling rate of aluminium is already very high. So, but now it's we need to do the extra mile to get back as much of this scrap as possible. And finally, I just also wanted to mention the EPBD launched yesterday, which is very interesting. We will look more into it, but the disclosure of LCA calculations mentioned in there seems very interesting from our side. Thank you.
Great, many thanks, Rona. Well, I'm sure we'll pick up on the digital product passport and many of the other points that you mentioned in the Q&A. But let me pass straight over to Celine and to welcome you and to give you the chance to give us your perspectives on this as well briefly. So over to you. Can't hear you? No. If you're struggling, I'll pass over to Anthony, assuming we can hear Anthony. I still can't hear you, so let me allow you a chance to resolve your technical problem. And Anthony, good to have you. I hope we will be able to hear you and look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Over to you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me loud and clear?
I'm very pleased to say we can.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Matjaž, for a great presentation. Thank you, you others, for also good inputs. So, Anthony Abbott's heading up Public Affairs Sustainability in the Rockwool Group. So, the Rockwool Group, the largest manufacturer of stone wool products in the world, based in Denmark. Circularity and decarbonisation, you know, strategic priorities for us. And the thing about the two is that they're interlinked. Decarbonisation, if we take that first, you know, committed to science-based targets and aggressive targets in 2034, both in scope 1, 2, and 3, and we have 3 levers to drive that decarbonisation. The one is energy efficiency, the second one is technology innovation, and the third one is circularity. And basically, the fact that we're able to recycle our product and our material means that we're reducing the carbon intensity at our production facilities by around 10%. So there's a close linkage between the two. I think when it comes to driving this, what is incredibly important is having a clear understanding of definitions and the robustness and governance around the data that defines these different parameters, whether it's within embodied carbon or whether it's in circularity. And it's really important for us that that these definitions, they're based on science. And we're seeing, for example, within the carbon arena, that there are you could say, inconsistencies in terms of disclosures around Scope 3 and incorrect calculations, for example, around biogenic carbon and so forth. So while we support increased focus on embodied carbon in materials, we need to have that increased focus. What is important is that we have clear definitions that are based on certain standards, and there's a good governance around the data that is being provided for that. So that would be a key comment. When we look at circularity, and I was really happy to hear a number of comments from Matjaž there about the different elements of circularity. We see that there can be a certain tendency towards defining circularity, for example, as being only recycled content. And whilst recycled content, of course, is an important element of circularity, it should not be the only one. And that's why I was really happy to hear Matjaž mention also material health and mention also durability. Recyclability, of course, incredibly important as well. And we know that there can be a situation where you increase recycled content to a certain level that means the recyclability of that particular material no longer is possible. So therefore you're compromising on the recyclability of that material, which means that suddenly you're reducing the amount of time that that material is in society. So trying to avoid downcycling. Another aspect that we need to be aware of course, is the link to carbon, because there can be situations where increasing recycled content is more carbon intensive than having lower levels of recycled content. So the fact that when we work with circularity and when we work with recyclability, that we need to look at these different parameters, durability, I think is often an area that is underestimated or not focused sufficiently on within circularity. And I would say that it's far better to have a lower recycled content in material, but then have a long lifetime than having a very short lifetime and having a high recycled content. So having a balance between those areas, I think, is incredibly important. We're a company that has clear goals when it comes to circularity. We have offered take-back systems in a number of markets for decades, and we have a clear goal that by 2030 we're offering robust take-back systems in 30 countries. We're up to 14 in 2020 and expect to go to 17 this year. We are challenged in a number of countries in increasing the volumes that are coming back from the markets. And I was also happy to hear Matjaž mention that, you know, there's focus on removing the barriers to increased circularity. We're challenged, for example, in some markets that landfill prices remain low, and that means that there is no incentive to use our take-back systems. We're also challenged in some countries in terms of cross-border transportation of material. And I think that what we need as a company, if we're going to succeed in having stronger circular business models, what we need is that the Commission starts developing a regulatory landscape that looks at material as material if it has a value, rather than looking at it as waste, and also regulating according to that. So if there is a material stream that can be utilized in another industry, and that can be as a feedstock, so it can be pre-consumer or it can be post-consumer, then it should be easier to for companies like ourselves to be able to utilize that material. I think that was my input.
That's very good, thank you. So let us see whether Celine has managed to find her voice, so to speak. I'm afraid I still can't hear you. You might have to log out and log back in again if you want to try that. If you'll forgive us, we will keep going in the meantime, and I will get you back involved as soon as you're able to reappear, hopefully with the sound working. And maybe Matjaž, if you would like to rejoin us as well. We've got some questions. I've got a number of questions which have been suggested by our audience, which I would like to put to all of you, some to specific individuals as well. But one for, I guess, the businesses here. One of the questions that has come up is how to, given all the methodological challenges you mentioned, Anthony, in particular, how do we account for scope 3 emissions, carbon footprints of products when we are addressing these issues? Do we need to have specific requirements for that already? How would that be seen by yourselves? How would we achieve that? Maybe we could just quickly tackle that before I then put a couple of other questions, I think directed directly to you, Matjaž, first. Harry, would you like to start on that one?
Yeah, no, certainly. So I would say that a way of working that we have in actually then promoting more energy efficient solutions that have a lower scope 3 carbon impact is return on investment, payback time. So where we look at the lifetime of a project over a scope of 5 years or 7 or 10. But most of all, we would also see that this should be included in public procurement. And that is also why some time ago we coined, and now we are using the term circular procurement, because that's the perfect way to promote efficiency over the lifetime of a project, and thereby already to account carbon, but then also to include, as I mentioned before, embedded carbon. So if those are included in procurement, you then see the ranking of a project on payback time, on economics, and also on the carbon, the environmental impact. That should be driving choice. And we see that still today, a lot of procurement decisions are based on lowest initial cost, and actually had then some, the terms had then cost and value are wrongly used, because it's only the lowest initial price tag. Because already long ago we said, the cheapest lamp is the most expensive. I think we all know that, and that is why we are so much involved in this work. We should look over the life cycle. We should actually take away the barrier of the somewhat higher investment or of the renovation budget that is required through the different business models, but the decision making should clearly be based on circular procurement, including the euros and the carbon.
Great, thank you. Can I turn to you, Ronald, and then you, Anthony, as well, with broadly the same question?
Yes, on scope 3 emissions. In our company, we have been calculating the carbon footprint throughout the value chain. I think we started back, it's more than 10 years ago, which has been essential for all our investment analysis. We have always calculated, of course, the profitability, but also the carbon footprint. So then everything has gone into that, back to the bauxite mine, shipping, etc. So it's essential that we find a way to do that. What we also need to include, and that's another dimension, the environment and social dimension also. For disclosures, I don't have the clear answers now, but these dimensions needs to be part of the total picture in the economy. So no clear answers to calculate the carbon footprint throughout the value chain. Being present in the whole value chain, we have done this exercise, and it's possible to do it.
Great, thank you. Same question to you, Anthony, and then I'll come to you, Matjaž.
So the devil is in the detail, and when you look at scope 3 emissions, then typically data is provided based on a combination of life cycle assessments and primary data from, for example, suppliers. When you look at life cycle assessments, we all know that there's an incredible amount of uncertainty when carrying out life cycle assessments. So what is key is that there is a standardized, harmonized approach across Europe when calculating and doing LCAs. In our industry, we're using EN 15804, which is a standard, But even then, even when there is a standard, there will be large discrepancies between companies reporting on carbon. And one of the reasons is, for example, that there is no requirement to what databases are used. So you can basically cherry pick. You can say, okay, I prefer this particular emission over here because the emission factor is lower, whereas over here, you know, it's less good. And there is that opportunity to do that. I mean, we're not doing that. We're using Gabi, but we know that that opportunity is there. So I think that what is really important when it comes to LCA is there is a clear governance on what standards to use, and that is harmonized. We also know that there are some emissions that sometimes are not disclosed for one reason or another, and it creates that level or unlevel playing field. So our request here is, yes, we should be using LCAs, but there should be a much stronger governance on what data is used.
Great, thank you. And Matjaž, I'm going to try and summarize several questions that we've had from the audience, as well as pick up on some of those points, if I may. One broad question: you mentioned planetary boundaries as one of the dimensions that this initiative is taking into account. To what extent do you think that means absolute reduction in material consumption or not in this agenda that you're developing? The second question is linked to the role that chemicals policy plays in this, and the aspiration towards a toxic-free environment, and the link between this agenda and that agenda, and how you're working on combining the two. And the third, from different perspectives, many people are interested, obviously, in the detail around the digital product passport. Is there anything else that you can say that would give more indication of what is going to be required in that, given obviously you're still working on it? But if we can start with those, I hope that gives you enough to get your teeth into.
Gives me plenty. Thanks a lot. Just first to say, it's been really interesting to listening to the others as well. So I'm getting a lot of questions myself, but I'll let that for later on. It's just really interesting to hear your examples, and also a couple of pitfalls you pointed to. So maybe just very briefly to say, SPI will be ambitious. It is not panacea. It will be sort of an instrument that will help structure, I think, over time, also the regulatory landscape, deal with things that are not being dealt today, and help other instruments by addressing things they can't. But clearly, it is not like one big piece of legislation that removes everything that's been done before. So just maybe this clarification is useful. And I mentioned several times it will work based on eco-design model. So that means that it will be through implementing measures that a lot of things will get done. It is not that exact specific requirements would be set out at the moment we adopt it. Clearly, we will be clear enough about the methodologies that we would use in those measures, and we would set out as much detail as we can to keep it flexible enough. So it's a bit of a balance we have to keep there as well. On a specific question, first, absolute reduction of material. The JRC in scientific study basically established that in 3 of the planetary boundaries, European consumption alone, so consumption in Europe, is breaching those, and that this is particulate matter. It's climate change, obviously. And the third one escapes me now, which gives me a lot of food for thought next time to have defensive points in front of me. But I can actually share the study with all the participants later on, so you can look at this. So what we'll try to do is that when we are prioritizing which products or horizontal measures to work on, so-called work program, that we really, one of the key determinants will be how much impact can we achieve. But the nature of the instrument is not setting targets, because it's basically a tool. So what's foreseen for the moment is not to set targets for absolute reduction, but rather to see how you would go about such reduction. But clearly, and the third, the third planetary boundary is actually resource use. So clearly getting clear impact would be less virgin resources used for products in Europe. That means resources that are either taken in Europe or taken elsewhere. So that is basically the answer. I don't think we see targets. Discussions still to be held at political level, so I don't want to be quoted as saying there will be no targets or there will be targets, but the eco-design model that we work on is not about setting absolute targets, but it's about designing tools to bring certain elements of consumption or material use down. So that would be my first answer. My second one is we're working very closely with chemicals people, also on implementation of the chemical strategy. And I think I can say that the SPI is not meant to be replacing REACH or anything of the sort, but we would deal with both information requirements that are actually needed for businesses on one hand to have clear understanding of composition of materials so that they can take this information into account when they're either taking them apart or recycling them or remanufacturing them. And it is also very likely we would deal with information requirements that help consumers understand if products themselves contain chemicals that would be interesting to them, which is chemicals of high concern. But I wouldn't go further than this this stage, but just to reassure that both the technical experts who are working on developing sustainable chemicals next steps in the strategy and experts who are working on the SPI are talking to each other and making sure that we roll out complementary, not competing or overlapping instruments. On the passport, I'd really like to stay away from the detail at this stage because we're all talking a lot. So I'm afraid I have to stay at the level of principles that we don't expect we would organize a huge database hosted by European Commission that would get all the information in the world about the products. We're rather looking at decentralized ways, as long as we can ensure that there is integrity of data remains protected and that access to data is on a need-to-know basis, because we clearly heard that a lot of businesses are concerned about disclosing everything to everybody. So there's a lot of discussion still to be held on what is on need-to-know basis, and we'll be looking closely at the pilot projects that are already running. So thanks a lot to Rona for mentioning one, but we've seen also quite a few others. So we will be really looking at how things can be done. And the second principle I think we all agree on is to start with intersection of where the need is the biggest and readiness is the closest to rollout. So it's not designing a very hypothetical tool that could catch every detail, but it's rather setting up an empowerment and basic principles so that we can all have an informed discussion about it. Because once we come up with the proposal, as you know, everybody's got a period to look at it, provide their opinions, but also we'll have targeted discussions with most concerned stakeholders. So we want to continue discussing based on some very clear principles that we want to set up, and then understand really how to get the right balance between what I was saying, and then do that through an implementing measure. That's a bit how the philosophy of what we're developing looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's I see that Celine has rejoined us, and I'm crossing my fingers that you've solved the sound problem. Yes. Now? Yes, oh, that's good.
Wonderful.
In which case, you've missed a few minutes, but hopefully you can pick up from where you heard, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say in response to what Matjaž and others have said before you. But over to you.
Yes, okay. I try to be brief. Lots have been said already. I work with Saint-Gobain, which is a French company. We're active in building materials and solution. You would find us under glazing solution, insulation, gypsum, and many others. That's for the background. A few very interesting remarks have already been made regarding drivers in our sector and the drive to circularity. Maybe at this stage, I would pick to one point that you just mentioned, Matjaž, which is the reduction on the pressure on natural resources, which will need to be factored in how we define recycling. So that's, I think, something to be kept in mind for our future work. Maybe I would point to two things. One are generic comments on the ecosystem in which we are working, and the other is maybe specific areas for recommendation. There are so many different initiatives in the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 that says it's super ambitious, and that's great. What we are there together with in that journey is to make sure that it is working and it's synchronized when it's speaking to the different actors in the value chain. And that's actually the difficulty and where maybe the work with this Sustainable Product Initiative can help a little further. For example, it's about for us when to plan for an evolution and incorporating recycled content and investments that belong to it, and trying to anticipate when there will be actual market and demand for that. Same goes for decarbonizing levers and investment into switching process in order to have renewable energy supply. So for us, I think the big challenge is to get that big picture right and understand what's happening in the building sector at building level, the different drivers for decarbonization, and plug that into a product-related policy. It was mentioned, for example, earlier on that the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which has been released yesterday, is progressing on the recognition of whole life carbon, therefore the embodied carbon of product. The question is, will that go fast enough? Are we equipped? And is everyone using the same methodologies in order for true comparability of product and solution to be in place? Lots has been done in this sector. The levels framework has been developed, is up for incorporation uptake on the market, and that's actually great. But then at product level, I would see maybe a few challenges on which we really want to progress together with you and all the actors and networks in which we are working. I think the one is maybe to clarify what sustainability is in construction product and how that relates to the building level. But then, as was mentioned by Anthony, the big challenge is the transparency and the understanding of those different impacts. And it's one thing to say that we indeed have a number of methodologies, and yes, they are there. They can be improved, but they are fundamental for comparability. But the big challenge is also the training in the sector. Saint-Gobain has taken quite an early journey on EPDs and environmental product declaration. At present stage, we have over 1,500 of verified EPDs. This is, I would say, an evolutionary process, and it's part of our 2030 objective to have all of our product categories covered by EPDs. But we see the challenge as something for all the rest of the construction world, and which leads me to something which is important in relation to the Sustainable Product Initiative is I mentioned earlier synchronization in terms of timing, but another aspect is a synchronization in terms of policy tools, because in matters construction product, that Sustainable Product Initiative will come together, or at least in terms of timing, as we understand, with a revision of the construction product regulation that also intends to accelerate on sustainability, and that's great, and we support this, and also incorporate some requirements for disclosure, but also possibly for recycled content. So there needs to be articulation and a smooth one, preferably in order to make the change happen even faster. The link between tools which are there for an end-use product or intermediary product is important. So yes, the transparency, the synchronicity of the tools, and also the wider picture. And that's where elements mentioned already by Anthony are important. The drive for circularity in the sector. Just the very fact that it's still authorized and it doesn't cost enough to landfill construction materials. I mean, that doesn't make sense if we want our product no longer to be called waste, because indeed they have a value. Recycling goals in the construction sector, we have overall recycling goals for all of them, which leaves basically lightweight construction materials a bit in a nowhere situation, because they are not visible enough, and the incentives not yet there to drive their circularity. Yes, waste shipments, end of waste is very important. That link between buildings and products will be eminently important. That's why also I think it's going to be a focus in the construction cluster. So that's another piece of the puzzle that we are looking to, the construction roadmap, and how to move forward, at least, in parallel, the requirements on buildings and products. And I would end. I know time is short, and I had those issues with the microphone. Just to say that it is a top priority for our group. Saint-Gobain adopted in 2019 its 2050 carbon neutrality goal, and immediately after, in all of our businesses, all of our activities in countries, nearly 70 of them, work was going on regarding clarifying what does that mean for our roadmap to 2030, within which circularity and process change is actually key. So I'm just here to say that all of what we are discussing here also has greater relevance in internally, and the more we can help in bringing clarity in how that regulatory framework will evolve at European level, the better we can catalyze change internally, not only in Europe, but also outside of Europe, where we are present. And I think here the European Union has a great role to play. So sorry for the changes and the issues.
No, thank you very much. I'm glad you solved your issues. And indeed, we don't have a time, I'm afraid, to go back to put other points to Harry, Rona, and Anthony. But the point you made about these rules in Europe leading to effects not just within but beyond Europe, and indeed encouraging the companies and market players who are active here to innovate and excel in this before others, is indeed very much what this group is also looking at, and how best therefore to do that, to get those benefits for the businesses involved, but also obviously all the environmental, social impacts. I'm conscious, as I said, of time having passed. My request would be now that we hear from Chiara. Matjaž, if you would like to stay with us, I'll ask the others if you would like to leave us, and I'll call you back in if we have a moment to be able to put other questions to you. Thank you in any case, if not. And with that, please let me introduce Chiara Martinelli, who is the new Director of Climate Action Network Europe. It's great to see you again, Chiara. Thank you for joining us. And you've heard lots, and I hope you can get your head around all of it and give us some thoughts before we obviously need to conclude today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. I will try my best. Of course, as you said, yes, we heard a lot. But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate CAN Europe to this important debate. And overall, I will say that I will try to react to what I heard by sticking to the overarching message is that we do need to work together. And I think that this is this webinar is an important sign in that direction. If we want to move forward in this industrial transformation we want to see, avoiding neglecting any important element, being the climate, the social, or the economic perspective. So I really welcome and thank you again for this opportunity. At CAN Europe, we do work on industry, I just wanted to briefly say that it is a work strand that also for us as a civil society organizations, climate and working on climate and energy is quite a new commitment, and we are trying to develop in this work within the umbrella of the production and consumption partners. And why I'm saying that is also a way to say like how much it's needed to work together across the different actors, and also because we believe it's an essential way to really address the climate emergency, to address its root causes, but most important, to provide pathways that are possible to reach the climate targets that we have. So I just wanted to recall all of us that we have been working very hard. I think all the people in this call in trying to get a binding 2030 climate target. We now have it. So I think now we just need to all turn on into the mood that we need to work on the how. How do we open up like these clear pathways to make sure that we reach this target? And I'm very pleased that also the experiences and the examples we got from different people in the panel were really into this direction. And maybe if you allow me, I just wanted to literally read what the European Green Deal text is telling us about these kind of pathways that we wanted to see to reach this 2030 target. The text is saying that we call for fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy where there are no net emissions of greenhouse gases in 2050 and where economic growth is decoupled from resource use. So I think that we have the vision there, right? So I think we already a good step forward will be to stick to what we committed to. My second point is really, I really appreciated preparing for this panel and reading the briefing that have been launched today. I think this is an important tool for all of us engaged in this discussion to keep calling on you, Matjaž, and who you represent, on making sure that this initiative, this sustainable production initiative, is going to be an important element of a progressive policy framework that we need, and also a policy framework that is not limited to the aims of the Fit for 55 package, but is going beyond those dossiers. I believe that EU companies need more than carbon pricing or carbon border mechanism, and more than increased access to renewable energy uses to achieve European Green Deal's objectives. The second element, maybe I wanted but I mean, I already heard like in the exchange a lot about that. So allow me to just repeat and also share how much Can Europe is supporting that element, that we are calling for an integrated approach to reduce emission by 2030, by 2050, or anyway, to reduce emissions. And this integrated approach, I think we should be clear, that means looking beyond a narrow technological decarbonization pathway. And here I'm bringing back a little bit the elements that have been raised about having a holistic approach, having a holistic definition of sustainability principles, and across, like how we call it, like horizontal sustainability principles, but also that we are very clear on what those principles entails. And we probably need to mention a little bit more like what those principles are and what they are not. So really to help us to move away from a narrow techno and quantitative approach forward. I'm just looking at my notes, sorry. I think the other important element I wanted to share in that sense about about the principles we wanted to stick to. I wanted to share that as Can Europe, and there are many studies out there and many data. At Can Europe, we developed some what we call Paris Agreement compatible scenarios that really set out sector-specific pathways for achieving the emission reductions we need to achieve the 1.5 degree goal. And across these different sector-specific pathways, what has been very clear is that reducing material and energy demand is systematically a priority across sectors. So I'm very happy that I heard, especially the last speaker, speaking a lot about it. And I think in that sense, I see progress. Like this discussion, I think is moving and is reaching different spaces, but there is still a lot of resistance, especially in among the industry actors. And we need to stop this resistance. And maybe one way to stop this resistance is to ensure that at the EU level, we can have resource reduction targets. I think this will be a very concrete call to answer to the challenge that we have, that of our planetary boundaries. And I think this is definitely something we will welcome by looking also at the SPI initiative. I mean, I'm not repeating things on the eco design. I think everybody already mentioned that. So maybe I just conclude, because I know time is also running, by saying that as CLG Europe, we are very happy to see this group of progressive leaders. Moving forward, we'll be happy to continue working together. And I would say, like, across a couple of main elements. The first one, by calling together for a more complete policy toolbox to make sure that we make the most of companies' capacity and creativity towards truly sustainability goals. And the second element, really, like by keeping companies accountable, being companies accountable, and to be stopping greenwashing, and really tackling the root causes of the unsustainable production patterns that we see today as dominant. So maybe I stop here for now.
That's great. Many thanks. And before I wrap things up, Matjaž, there's obviously a lot of questions that have come in which we can't get into now, but I promise those of you who've asked questions will come back to you separately, but they cover everything from packaging, product environmental footprint methodologies, targets per sector, per material, and so on. We can't go into that now, but do you have any thoughts on what you've heard from Chiara and our other panelists, just to wrap up before I say a few last comments on CISL and the task force side?
Yeah. No, just my first one would be that it is clear also from listening to Chiara and everybody, basically the challenges to our environmental and societal sustainability in the coming decades are immense. And they come basically from resource use. They come from consumption and production. So whether we're discussing climate change or we're discussing quality of air, we end up with the fact that we are consuming quite a lot. So there is a global problem that we are addressing with different tools, from Paris Agreement to products policy. And I think this is the one of the most important mega trends for the next decades. And policy that we're developing now has an important role to play. So that's why I said it's not panacea. I didn't want to be dismissive of our own work, but it can really play an important role. But it is part of a sort of toolbox, if I can borrow the term, and it will have to work moving in line with the others. And I think here it's important that also for us at the European Union level, at the Commission, that we're looking at different things we are doing together with the stakeholders, such as the industrial strategies, ecosystems, and the sort of key value chains oriented approach of the circular economy are working hand in hand. Things are complex. We cannot pretend, we cannot simplify them to absolute minimum, but we have to try to be conceptually clear and then work issues through. So that would be my sort of one key thought. And the second one is that I have also many questions, and I'm looking for the next coming months and years probably of clarifying them, but it's very encouraging to hear so many industry leaders being very engaged, understanding that this is a mega trend and wanting to contribute solving it. So I think that this for me is encouraging. It's easier to wake up in the morning when you know that you're not doing something that is going to end up nowhere. So that would be it for me. I'm very grateful also to the audience, and Martin, as usual, to you for excellent chairing of this meeting, and I'm looking forward to widely distributing its outcomes when they come, also to my colleagues who may not be attending today. Thank you.
Great, many thanks. And yes, I can but concur that I think you know, there are a number of key points that come out of this discussion today, and indeed of the policy brief that we've produced. It's clear there is a large area of agreement, a common agenda to work on here. And the companies that you've heard from and the task force are representative of the business community that wants to play a very active, engaged, ambitious role in that with you, not just with policymakers, but also with you, Chiara, and colleagues, because we have a lot in common, much more than divides us, I would say. The second, I think, is also that that process that you said you're looking for input, insight, we and others will obviously continue to do that, and the paper is a first step in that direction. We hope it's useful. It sets out a little bit of what you've both said, policy principles, but also some specifics, and much of the devil is in the detail here, of course, but without that clarity of conceptual thinking, the detail becomes more difficult to resolve. We will keep working on that. The group is determined to work more on this with other partners as well, research organizations, think tanks within CISL and beyond, and we look forward to sharing that with you. And obviously we look to show how this is obviously contributing to the Green Deal agenda in environmental and social terms, but also the competitive sustainability dimension. The economic benefit to Europe from leading in this area is also crucial for the economy to demonstrate that it is successfully making that transition in that way, as well as the environmental and social dimensions. So with that, let me bring things to a close to thank both you two, Chiara and Matjaž, for your excellent presentations and contributions. All of my colleagues, obviously from the task force, some of whom you heard speaking today, so many thanks to all of you, and of course to Tamid and all my colleagues at CISL who have worked behind the scenes to make everything happen. I am just the mouthpiece for all the people who do all the hard work. So thank you to all of you. And I wish you all a very happy Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and obviously a restful holiday period, which hopefully you can enjoy with your family and friends in the near future. So we look forward to seeing you all again in 2022. With that, goodbye and thank you.